In the hushed silence of a grand courtroom, with flashing cameras just beyond its wooden doors, a pregnant woman stands trembling at the witness stand. Her tears reflect a deep heartbreak and a determination that hints at secrets soon to be unleashed. On the other side, a smug mistress sits poised, certain she holds the upper hand. As the tension mounts, a hush falls over the entire room. When the wife's lawyer slides an envelope across the polished mahogany table, the DNA result inside carries the power to shake an entire millionaire dynasty to its core. And no one sees the devastating revelation coming. Alexander Whitman was born into privilege in the affluent town of Bellis's Park, where manicured lawns rolled behind wrought iron gates and family names carried weight like royal titles. The Whitman name had long been synonymous with influence, old money, and philanthropic endeavors. Alexander's great-grandfather, Franklin Whitman, had built the family's wealth through bold investments in steel and later expanded into international shipping and real estate. Over the generations, the Whitmans had established themselves as pillars of the community, known for their elite gatherings, charitable foundations, and a steadily growing financial empire. Now in his early 30s, Alexander had been groomed from birth to carry the torch of the family legacy. He attended the most prestigious boarding school's Crestfield Academy for high school, followed by Princeton for his undergraduate degree, and finally Harvard for his MBA. With each academic milestone, he earned accolades and worked alongside future business moguls, scholars, and even members of foreign royalty. By the time he returned to Bellis's Park, he had transformed into the quintessential gentleman his parents had raised him to be. Standing at 6 feet tall, with a poised demeanor and a quiet intensity in his green eyes, Alexander possessed a rare combination of elegance and command. Whether he was leading boardroom discussions or hosting charity galas, he had an effortless ability to draw people in. People hung on his words, for he carried the kind of presence that made others believe in his vision, whatever it happened to be. It was at a benefit event for the Whitman Foundation, which supported access to clean water in underserved regions, that Alexander met Camille Rivera. Camille came from a working-class background and understood the value of resilience. She was attending the University of Chicago on a merit scholarship, majoring in public relations, and had just landed a competitive internship with a respected media firm. She was at the benefit at her supervisor's recommendation, completely unaware she was about to meet the pride of Bellis's Park. Camille's heartfelt sincerity and her passion for creating change stood out in a room thick with polished smiles and rehearsed speeches. She spoke candidly about her journey, how she worked 2 jobs to pay her way through school, and how she believed education and access were the keys to lifting communities out of poverty. Alexander was instantly captivated by her authenticity and warmth, qualities he seldom encountered in his high society world. By the end of the evening, he made it a point to speak with her, and for the first time in years, he felt something close to being swept off his feet. Their connection was instant, like a brilliant spark in a room full of flickering light. It didn't take long for a whirlwind romance to bloom. Alexander courted Camille with every bit of old-world charm passed down through generations of the Whitman lineage. He sent her flowers, carefully chosen notes written by hand instead of hurried texts, and arranged candlelit dinners, not only in the finest restaurants of the city, but occasionally beneath the stars in the Whitman estate's sprawling private gardens. Camille, moved by his earnestness, responded with equal depth, despite the vastly different worlds they came from. Their shared belief in social causes and compassion for others became their common language. Within a year, Alexander proposed during the Whitman family's holiday celebration, presenting Camille with a vintage diamond ring that had once belonged to his grandmother. Their wedding, held on the estate's meticulously manicured lawn, was a spectacle of grandeur. Politicians, Fortune 500 CEOs, and public figures mingled under crystal chandeliers imported from Paris. But for all the opulence, the true moment of magic came when the two exchanged vows in front of a massive rose garden. Camille glowed in her ivory gown, pledging her heart through every high and low. Alexander promised to cherish and protect her, binding his life and fortune to hers. Their families wept with joy. The guests applauded with misty eyes, certain they were witnessing the beginning of an eternal union. For 2 blissful years, they appeared to be the ultimate power couple. The Whitman Foundation thrived under their leadership, expanding educational outreach programs and launching partnerships with global nonprofits. Alexander drove the family conglomerate, ranging from upscale real estate ventures to next-gen technology startups, while Camille spearheaded public relations and charitable campaigns. Together, they were a formidable force, so it seemed to the world. Behind closed doors, the immense pressure of maintaining a billionaire empire, constant media attention, and the heavy expectations tied to the Whitman legacy began to erode their relationship. Alexander was frequently away, jetting between meetings in San Francisco, Dubai, or Tokyo, leaving Camille alone in the vast halls of their mansion. Her schedule was no less taxing, but emotionally, she felt the rift between them widen with a silence neither had the strength nor the time to address. Then came the moment that shifted Camille's world, the day she found out she was pregnant. When Camille saw the positive result, her heart swelled with a mixture of joy and uncertainty. She envisioned Alexander being elated, their baby serving as the bridge to bring them back together. Longing for that reconnection, she planned the perfect surprise for their anniversary, a romantic dinner by candlelight, sparkling cider in place of champagne, and a small gift box. Inside were a pair of delicate baby shoes and a note that read, "You're going to be a father." But when Alexander unwrapped the box, a flicker of pause crossed his expression. He smiled, but the spark in his eyes had dimmed. Camille could see it. This wasn't the response she dreamed of. It wasn't outright rejection, but neither was it unfiltered joy. He pulled her into an embrace and said all the right things how amazing this was, but the tension in his voice hinted at something else entirely. Something else was at play. She convinced herself it was just the pressure of a major merger weighing on his mind. In the days that followed, Camille noticed Alexander becoming increasingly withdrawn, as if an invisible barrier had risen between them. He still attended prenatal appointments when his calendar allowed, participated in lighthearted talks about nursery themes, and flipped through baby name books by her side. But his interest felt muted, buried beneath a sea of business calls, hurried dinners, and the unrelenting hum of new ventures demanding his attention. One evening, midway through her second trimester, Camille stepped quietly into Alexander's home office, a grand study lined with floor-to-ceiling bookcases and stoic portraits of past Whitman patriarchs. She found him hunched at his desk, staring blankly at a folded letter in his hands. When she asked what was wrong, he quickly tucked the paper into a drawer and offered a strained smile. "Just business stuff," he said. "Everything's fine." But Camille caught the tremor in his voice, the tension that hovered just beneath the surface. The weeks that followed only deepened the mystery. Alexander began taking private calls late at night, retreating to the veranda or his study. Camille once overheard his hushed voice behind a half-closed door. The moment she stepped closer, the conversation ended abruptly. He began canceling dinner plans, arriving home long after midnight. Once, she caught the faint scent of unfamiliar perfume clinging to his jacket, floral and expensive, not hers. She tried to explain it away. Perhaps it was business-related, glamorous networking events, industry galas, circles where polished women were as common as champagne flutes. She wanted to trust him, needed to, but a slow, creeping unease began to settle in her chest, casting long shadows through the gilded halls of the Whitman estate. Pregnancy made Camille more sensitive, more aware. She craved reassurance, clarity, but Alexander's answers grew more vague with each passing day. What used to be playful conversations about baby gear turned into stiff exchanges, each tinged with subtle defensiveness. Something was off, and deep down, she knew it. Still, she forced herself to stay focused on her health, on their child. She filled her days with parenting books, prenatal yoga, and public appearances at the Whitman Foundation. In front of cameras, she still smiled. She still played the role of Bellis's Park's poised, untouchable wife. But at night, When the lights dimmed and she lay awake, Camille couldn't shake the fear that her life was slowly unraveling, that she was the only one holding it together. Then came the moment she couldn't ignore. While looking for her phone charger in Alexander's car, Camille opened the glove box and froze. Inside was a sleek platinum bracelet. She picked it up slowly, her pulse thudding in her ears. On the inner band, engraved in neat script, were the initials BM. They weren't hers. The design was undeniably feminine, and from the elegant detailing, she could tell it was recent, possibly from a high-end boutique in Paris. Camille's stomach turned. It all began to fit. The calls, the distance, the silence. She couldn't bear it anymore. That evening, Camille waited in their bedroom, the bracelet clutched in her trembling hand. When Alexander walked in, she met his eyes with quiet devastation. Her voice cracked as she held up the bracelet. "Who does this belong to, Alexander?" she asked. His face turned ghostly pale, and for a brief second, he looked almost relieved that she had brought it up. He stumbled over his explanation, claiming it was a gift for a business associate who had done them a significant favor. His smile was weak, barely there, and did nothing to ease Camille's anguish. Doubt began to take root, overshadowing what should have been the joy of her pregnancy. The next morning, Camille did a quick search through popular society blogs and celebrity photo threads. One name repeatedly surfaced in connection with Alexander Whitman. Bianca Monroe, a rising fashion designer with a flair for spectacle and a reputation for stirring headlines. Gossip sites buzzed with speculation about their supposed closeness, though Alexander's PR team had been swift to shut down the chatter with carefully worded denials. Still, the photos painted a different picture. The two entering an exclusive private club in Manhattan, leaving a five-star hotel in Milan. Alexander's hand resting gently on the small of Bianca's back in a way that was far too intimate for comfort. Camille's fingers trembled as she scrolled through the images. A chill gripped her chest. Her heart pounded with a volatile mix of rage and heartbreak. She tried calling Alexander, desperate to confront him with what she'd found, but he didn't answer. Not once. In that moment, she understood the man she had married, the man she believed in, was no longer the one standing beside her. The carefully constructed illusion of their perfect marriage was beginning to fracture, shards of betrayal threatening to tear everything apart. Pregnant, alone, and uncertain about what came next, Camille knew she had to reach out. She called Maya Reynolds, a friend from her college years who now worked at a respected local law firm. While Maya didn't specialize in family law, Camille trusted her implicitly. At the very least, Maya could listen and connect her with the right legal channels if it came to that. Camille told her everything: a bracelet, the late-night phone calls, the photos. Maya, horrified by Alexander's betrayal, offered her full support without hesitation. That night, as the lights dimmed inside the sprawling Whitman estate and silence reclaimed the halls, Camille sat alone, her hand resting over her belly. She whispered to her unborn child, "No matter what happens, I'll protect you." But she couldn't have foreseen the magnitude of the storm about to descend, one that would not only threaten the Whitman name, but send Camille into the most grueling trial of her life. Bianca Monroe wasn't just another headline-chasing socialite. She was a ruthless, ambitious climber who had navigated the fashion world with sharp instincts and even sharper manipulation. Her designs were bold, eccentric, more often found on gossip blogs than in top fashion magazines. Standing at a statuesque 5 feet 9 inches with a mane of platinum blonde hair and a frostbitten smile that could silence critics, Bianca thrived on scandal, convinced that all publicity, good or bad, was fuel for her brand. So when Alexander Whitman began to appear in her circles, the rumors exploded. The paparazzi caught them together repeatedly at underground clubs during her Fashion Week events and at elite restaurants in Paris and Milan. For months, whispers grew louder, suggesting that Bianca was the other woman. Alexander's publicists moved quickly to suppress the stories, issuing threats, paying off tabloids, and spinning damage control. But behind the scenes, Bianca had no interest in keeping the relationship secret. She seduced Alexander with extravagant soirees and a taste of a world far removed from his family's philanthropic banquets and formal black-tie galas. With her, Alexander tapped into a part of himself he had always buried, a craving for unpredictability and danger. Each rendezvous with Bianca brought a jolt of freedom, a thrill he couldn't find in the carefully managed empire of the Whitmans. Bianca quickly became addicted to the power she held over Alexander. She enjoyed shaping her own story, but shaping his that was a far more tantalizing conquest. To manipulate the heir of one of Bellis's Park's most powerful families was the ultimate thrill. The goal wasn't just Alexander's affection. It was his last name, his wealth, and the envy that would radiate through every tier of high society. But Alexander was torn between the life he'd built with Camille, especially now that she was carrying his child, and the intoxicating escape Bianca offered. Deep down, he knew there was a boundary he should never cross, but pride and the allure of rebellion drove him closer to the edge, eager to outrun the suffocating pressure of the Whitman legacy. Bianca sensed this fracture in him and seized the moment. She pushed him to make promises he wasn't ready to keep. Secret rendezvous weren't enough anymore. She wanted recognition. She wanted him and everything that came with him out in the open. And in a lapse of judgment, Alexander made assurances that would haunt him. When the news of Camille's pregnancy became public, Bianca's envy turned volatile. She felt diminished, an afterthought overshadowed by the legitimate wife carrying Alexander's heir. So, she devised a plan, one that would thrust her directly into the spotlight and embed her deeper into Alexander's life. It began with calculated photo leaks, with paparazzi images whispered into the ears of gossip sites. Then, she proposed the launch of a new fashion collection. The unveiling would take place in Hong Kong, a city Alexander regularly visited for business. She insisted he attend, promising a low-key presence. In truth, she had already tipped off select photographers, ensuring they would be positioned for just the right angles, the kind that sparked firestorms. Alexander, unaware of Bianca's orchestration, agreed. That night, on the rooftop terrace of a glittering Hong Kong skyscraper, cameras flickered from hidden corners, freezing the moment his hand lingered on Bianca's waist just a little too long, a pose too intimate to ignore. By morning, the tabloids exploded with explosive headlines. Photos of the pair laughing and leaning close suggested far more than a business relationship. Thousands of miles away in Bellis's Park, Camille woke to the sight of her husband's face plastered across entertainment outlets and society columns. And next to him, Bianca. Her stomach turned. The devastation was instant, raw, and impossible to contain. When Alexander returned home, Camille confronted him in a whirlwind of sobs and fury. There were no more denials. This time, he didn't even try to spin the truth. He blamed exhaustion, the demands of work, the suffocating expectations. It was a mistake, he muttered, a lapse in judgment. But Camille saw the detachment in his eyes, the absence of real remorse, and knew this was no fleeting misstep. Bianca had planted herself deep. Emboldened by the success of her media stunt, Bianca escalated her demands. She wanted to be seen on Alexander's arm at public events, to be recognized openly. In one chilling phone call, she threatened to go public with even more photos, text messages, and videos if he didn't comply. She even boasted about a potential collaboration with a top-tier real estate mogul, someone who could either rival or partner with the Whitman conglomerate. The message was crystal clear. She could sabotage Alexander both personally and professionally if he didn't fall in line. Trapped, Alexander felt control slipping through his fingers. For the first time in his life, his family name, wealth, and influence weren't enough to contain a scandal. Bianca had him cornered, and his marriage to Camille was fraying fast. Every time he tried to cut ties, Bianca threatened more exposure, more fallout. If Camille learned the full extent of their affair, and worse, the fact that Alexander had once made vague promises to leave it all behind for Bianca, he feared she would leave him. And if she did, she'd likely walk away with a sizable portion of the Whitman fortune. But nothing could have prepared him for what came next. In a private text, Bianca dropped a bombshell. She claimed she was pregnant, too. Alexander's world spun. If true, the repercussions would be catastrophic. Two women, both carrying what could be heirs to the Whitman dynasty. The press would feast on it. The scandal could fracture the legacy that generations of Whitmans had built. Desperate, Alexander turned to one of the few people he still trusted, William Frost, a seasoned attorney who had served as the Whitman family's behind-the-scenes problem solver for decades. William had a reputation for discretion and an iron will, often cleaning up the messes that others couldn't touch. But Alexander underestimated how quickly things would spiral once William stepped in. On the day Alexander met with Frost in his downtown office, he pleaded for a way to neutralize Bianca's claims and ensure Camille remained unaware of the affair's depth. Frost, calm and calculating, promised to dig into it, starting with a discreet private investigator to confirm whether Bianca was truly pregnant. If the claim was false, they would discredit her. If true, a confidential settlement would be arranged to handle things quietly. What no one saw coming was the leak. Word spread quickly in Bellicis Park's elite circles. Soon, whispers began that Alexander was not only cheating, but also scrambling to conceal a second pregnancy. The story evolved faster than anyone could control. Meanwhile, Camille, already shattered by the media images, had contacted Maya Reynolds again. This time, Maya connected her with Mia Donovan, a high-profile family lawyer known for her fierce advocacy on behalf of betrayed spouses. Before Alexander could finalize any private settlement, he was blindsided by legal papers. Camille was filing for a formal separation. The media storm peaked in a volatile confrontation. Bianca arrived flanked by her own attorney, threatening a lawsuit for emotional damages and demanding public acknowledgement of her unborn child along with child support. Camille, devastated but resolute, demanded full disclosure. She launched her own legal response, determined to secure protection for both herself and her unborn child. The stage was set for a high-profile court battle that threatened to engulf the Whitman family in a scandal unlike anything they had ever faced. Yet, behind a flurry of tabloid gossip and top-tier legal maneuvering, an even bigger secret was looming. DNA tests would soon be demanded to determine paternity. And the truth, far more entangled than any rumor, was on the verge of exploding, altering the lives of everyone involved. The day Camille first walked into Mia Donovan's sleek, glass-walled office was the day she made the decision to fight. Mia had built her reputation on fiercely advocating for women betrayed by powerful men. Perched atop one of Bellicis Park's tallest towers, Mia's office was an architectural marvel, spacious, polished, and intimidatingly modern. But as Camille sat on the leather chair facing the massive desk, she felt a strange calm. As Camille shared her story, tears streamed freely. She spoke of the betrayal, the humiliation, and the fear of raising a child amidst such chaos. Mia listened carefully, jotting notes in a sleek leather notepad. But when Camille mentioned Bianca's rumored pregnancy, Mia's gaze sharpened. "We need proof," she said, her voice calm but decisive. "We can't act on speculation, and we'll need a full financial breakdown. If we pursue separation or divorce, your child's future and yours must be secure." Meanwhile, Alexander was scrambling to manage the fallout. His longtime legal advisor, William Frost, urged him to project stability and contrition. "Stay calm. Publicly express regret. Emphasize your commitment to family," Frost instructed. "The moment you look cold, sympathy shifts to Camille and her baby. And if Bianca really is pregnant, we need paternity confirmation before releasing any statement." Bianca, too, was preparing for battle. She had retained Trevor Blaine, a celebrity lawyer renowned for extracting enormous settlements from elite clients. Blaine immediately went to work crafting a media-friendly narrative, casting Bianca as a misunderstood visionary who had been drawn to Alexander through artistic collaboration and an undeniable emotional connection. The tabloids jumped in, spinning dueling portrayals of Bianca, cunning seductress or exploited muse. Public opinion split down the middle. Amid the chaos, Camille's health began to decline. Stress robbed her of sleep. She experienced dizzy spells, migraines, and rising blood pressure. Her obstetrician, Dr. Felicia Warren, began seeing her more frequently, issuing repeated warnings. Chronic stress puts both you and the baby at risk, Dr. Warren cautioned. You need support. You need peace. One night, shortly after a brutal headline plastered her across national tabloids, Camille clutched her belly and collapsed onto the floor of her bedroom, overwhelmed by a sudden, stabbing pain. Her assistant rushed her to the ER, where doctors quickly stabilized her and monitored the baby. Thankfully, there was no permanent harm, but the incident served as a terrifying wake-up call. The sterile white lights of the hospital room, the cold stethoscope against her skin, the rush of nurses. Camille lay there blinking back tears, staring at the ceiling as the realization sank in. Dr. Warren looked her square in the eye and said, "That was a warning. You cannot go on like this." Camille left the hospital shaken, more aware than ever that she wasn't just surviving a scandal. She was fighting to protect a life that depended on her. But peace was impossible to find when every TV station flashed Alexander's face and every gossip blog dissected her marriage. Paparazzi swarmed outside the Whitman estate. Drones hovered overhead to capture any shred of drama. The once private mansion had become a war zone. The Whitman family, ashamed and desperate to save face, tried to contain the damage. Alexander's mother, Victoria Whitman, made a show of supporting Camille, offering carefully chosen words of comfort. But Camille felt the hollowness behind them. Victoria's true concern was the family's image, not Camille's well-being. As the scandal deepened, Frost and Blaine agreed to arrange a confidential mediation, their goal to avoid a courtroom circus. Frost arrived with clinical precision and a clear agenda. He presented a non-disclosure agreement that would bind Bianca to secrecy in exchange for a generous settlement. But Bianca had no intention of slipping quietly into the shadows. She wasn't content with being a secret or a payoff. She craved attention and saw this scandal as a golden opportunity to elevate her public image. Bianca refused to sign unless Alexander publicly acknowledged her child after a paternity test confirmed it. Frost immediately rejected the demand. A formal acknowledgement would be a public blow to the Whitman legacy. The mediation fell apart. Public fascination skyrocketed. The scandal dominated headlines, with talk shows debating the morality of Alexander's choices and social media flooding with hashtags like Whitman Affair. It became a modern soap opera. The pregnant wife versus the seductive mistress, and the world was hooked. Eventually, a court hearing was set. Camille, through Mia Donovan, filed for legal separation, citing infidelity and emotional trauma. She also filed for a restraining order against Bianca, who had begun taunting her on social media. Trevor Blaine, acting on Bianca's behalf, countered with a lawsuit claiming Alexander had promised her emotional and financial support. With pressure mounting, Alexander agreed to undergo paternity testing for both unborn children. It was the only way to regain any public sympathy. Despite everything, Camille found herself silently praying that Bianca's pregnancy was a lie. But the fear lingered. What if it wasn't? What if both children were his? The thought of raising her baby under the shadow of a perpetual custody war haunted her sleepless nights. The testing process moved forward in secrecy. Everyone waited, holding their breath, knowing that one page of lab data would shape the future. Then, 2 weeks before the court date, Frost received a sealed envelope labeled DNA results confidential. He immediately summoned Alexander to his office. When Alexander arrived, Frost locked the door behind him. The room was thick with unspoken tension. Without a word, Frost slid the envelope across the polished desk. Alexander hesitated, hands slick with sweat. "Open it," Frost said. Alexander fumbled with the seal, tearing it open with shaking fingers. He unfolded the documents and scanned the page, his eyes darting across the cold, clinical rows of genetic data. Frost watched him, his gaze unblinking. When Alexander finally spoke, his voice was raw. "This changes everything," he whispered. But before Frost could respond, his phone vibrated. It was Mia Donovan, calling on behalf of Camille. She requested an urgent meeting regarding new, significant evidence her team had uncovered. Frost's chest tightened. He looked at Alexander, who now sat pale and stricken, like a man who had just seen his entire life collapse. The meticulous strategies, the payoffs, the damage control, all of it could unravel in an instant. The labyrinth of lies and secrets was narrowing, and every corridor now seemed to lead toward a single, inescapable confrontation. The days leading up to the hearing felt like the eye of a storm. The Whitman estate, once a beacon of elegance, now hummed with tension. Staff tiptoed through hallways, avoiding eye contact. The gates were still flanked by journalists, their cameras at the ready. Camille found fleeting moments of peace in the quiet rhythms of her pregnancy, especially when she felt the soft flutter of her baby kicking. In those moments, she'd place a protective hand on her belly and remind herself of her mission, to safeguard this child above all else. Still, her nerves were fraying. She'd heard murmurs that Frost had the paternity results. Alexander hadn't said a word, but the haunted look in his eyes told her more than any headline ever could. With Mia Donovan's sharp guidance, Camille built her legal case carefully. Mia gathered documents detailing Alexander's assets, trust accounts, and investment portfolios. She also collected a trail of messages, photos, and witness statements from staff who had quietly observed suspicious behavior between Alexander and Bianca. Seeing Camille's pain, many household employees, once loyal to the Whitman name, chose to speak up. Meanwhile, Bianca launched her own offensive. She gave an explosive interview to a tabloid, masterfully shaped by Trevor Blaine. In it, she presented herself as the misunderstood woman who had fallen for a powerful man's promises. She spoke of her anxiety, her fear of being abandoned, and the betrayal she felt. She played to public empathy, and, for some, it worked. Frost, for his part, worked tirelessly behind the scenes. He considered selectively leaking a controlled version of the story, one that painted Alexander as having been deceived by Bianca. But the DNA results in his possession made that angle risky. They complicated any spin he could attempt. Torn between his loyalty to the Whitman family and the unpredictable legal terrain ahead, Frost debated whether to advise Alexander to negotiate a swift settlement or brave the firestorm of a public showdown. The night before the hearing, a private conversation unfolded in Alexander's study. He asked Camille to meet him there. She arrived to find him standing alone by the tall bay window, his silhouette illuminated by the moonlight. He looked like a man undone, his usual sharp composure traded for a hollow, grief-stricken stare. "I never wanted any of this," he said, his voice unsteady. "I was reckless, foolish, and now I might lose everything. Lose you, our baby." Camille stood still, fighting the tears rising in her throat. "If you never wanted this," she said quietly, "then why did you chase it? Why lie?" Again and again. Alexander struggled for words. What emerged was a tangled confession, part apology, part self-pity. He spoke of being manipulated, of Bianca tapping into his desire for something outside the rigid image the world expected of him. It was a confession soaked in guilt, and it was too little, too late. Before Camille left the room, she turned to face him, her cheeks streaked with tears, her voice barely a whisper. "Do you have any idea," she asked, "what it's like to go to bed every night carrying your child, not knowing if you'd rather be with her?" Alexander didn't respond. She left him there, swallowed by a silence and shame that had come far too late. The morning of the court hearing dawned under a pale, subdued sky. At the Bellis's Park courthouse, the steps were already swarming with reporters. Police officers lined the entrances, holding back the ever-growing crowd. Camille arrived with Mia Donovan at her side, head high, steady, even as flashbulbs burst around her. She wore a simple black maternity dress, her face free of makeup. It was her natural beauty and the unfiltered emotion in her eyes that held the courtroom in silent awe as she entered with quiet strength. Alexander followed soon after, accompanied by William Frost. Dressed in a finely tailored navy suit, he looked the part, but gone was the self-assured stride of Bellis's Park's favorite son. In its place was hesitation. Bianca arrived last, draped in a striking designer gown that accentuated her figure, her hand resting deliberately on her subtly rounded belly. Paparazzi surged forward as she soaked in the attention. Inside the courtroom, the tension was palpable. Presiding over the case was Judge Harriet Gibbons, a formidable presence who commanded immediate silence with a sharp rap of her gavel. Mia Donovan began with calm precision, outlining Camille's claims: infidelity, emotional distress, and the urgent need for financial support. She introduced damning evidence screenshots of messages, hotel invoices, private emails, all laying bare the extent of Alexander's betrayal. Camille kept her eyes on the floor, each detail cutting deeper than the last. Then, Trevor Blaine countered, casting Bianca as the misled woman manipulated by a man who had promised to leave his wife. Bianca's tears glistened under the courtroom lights, a seamless performance. Then the courtroom shifted as William Frost rose. His voice was cool and composed as he addressed the elephant in the room, paternity. And then he revealed the DNA results. Silence swept across the courtroom like a wave. For the child carried by Camille Rivera, Frost stated, his voice unwavering, there is a 99.9% probability that Mr. Whitman is the biological father. He paused, letting the words hang in the air. For the child claimed by Miss Bianca Monroe, the results show a 0% probability that Mr. Whitman is the biological father. Gasps rippled through the room. Murmurs buzzed in disbelief. Bianca went pale. Trevor Blaine stared in stunned silence. Frost pressed on. While my client acknowledges the affair, he bears no biological responsibility for Ms. Monroe's pregnancy. He has been wrongfully implicated. Bianca shot up from her seat, shouting, "This is a lie." He paid them off. He bribed the labs. But Frost calmly handed over the sealed documentation, certified and stamped by an independent testing agency, beyond dispute. Judge Gibbons banged her gavel sharply. Order in the court. For Camille, the revelation was a twist she hadn't anticipated. Her gaze shifted to Alexander. If Bianca's child wasn't his, then why had he acted so terrified? And then it dawned on her. Alexander hadn't known until very recently. The entire nightmare had been built on a lie Bianca used to control him. But Mia Donovan wasn't finished. She rose, her voice steady. "Your Honor," she began, "my client has come into possession of significant evidence regarding Ms. Monroe's motives." She handed documents to the judge, receipts from a private clinic in another state. The records revealed that Bianca had known for weeks that Alexander wasn't the father. The real father was a wealthy real estate developer named Conrad Gissom, ironically, someone with business ties to the Whitman family. The courtroom exploded with noise. Bianca's poise crumbled in real time. Her legal team whispered furiously among themselves as journalists scratched out the most scandalous headlines of the year. Judge Gibbons quickly demanded order. She gave Frost the floor to present Alexander's statement. Alexander stood, his voice low. He admitted to the affair. He apologized, and he asked the court to prioritize Camille's emotional and financial well-being. "I made terrible mistakes," he said, his eyes flicking briefly to Camille. "But my loyalty is to my wife and our unborn child. I am prepared to face any legal consequence to ensure their protection." His words rang hollow to Camille, but they carried legal weight. Frost presented a comprehensive settlement proposal: generous alimony, full child support, and immediate medical provisions. He also requested a permanent restraining order against Bianca. After a recess, Judge Gibbons issued temporary orders. Bianca Monroe was ordered to cease all public commentary. Alexander was required to continue providing financial support to Camille. A future court date was set, giving Camille time to decide whether to pursue divorce or attempt reconciliation. The gavel struck. The courtroom exploded into a frenzy. Outside, a shaken Bianca was swiftly ushered into a car by her lawyer, refusing to make any comment. Alexander, Frost, and Camille stepped out into the media gauntlet. Camille said nothing. She simply lifted her chin, walking with quiet dignity toward a waiting vehicle, the flashbulbs blinding but powerless. The final word of the day came from Mia Donovan. As Camille slid into the back seat, Mia stepped toward a microphone and delivered a calm, but cutting statement. The DNA results have silenced the mistress, but the emotional damage to my client is still raw. We will pursue justice, step by step. The world had witnessed the collapse of Bianca's deception. But for Camille and Alexander, a new reckoning loomed. The decision to part ways or to rebuild privately and quietly behind closed doors. For now, one truth stood firm. The mistress had been exposed, and the pregnant wife, though wounded, had emerged with her dignity untouched. Back at the Whitman estate, silence dominated for days. Camille, emotionally spent, remained in her suite, turning her focus entirely to her child's well-being. The media feasted on the scandal, but as for Bianca, the backlash was swift and brutal. Fashion sponsors quietly canceled deals. Her PR team vanished. Conrad Giesham, the actual father of her child, refused to speak publicly, cutting all visible ties to the debacle. Rumors swirled that Bianca had fled the country, vanishing from public view. During this fragile time, Mia Donovan became Camille's closest confidant, presenting her with divorce papers that would secure her future. Camille's mind churned with heartbreak over Alexander's betrayal, flickers of love for the man she once trusted, and a fierce maternal instinct to protect her unborn child. After a week of silence, Alexander requested a private meeting. They met beneath the sprawling oaks in the estate's secluded garden. He pleaded for forgiveness, acknowledging how he'd allowed a single affair to spiral into public disgrace. He offered to do anything: therapy, fewer business commitments, more time at home. He wanted to be a father, a better husband, someone Camille could count on again. Camille listened, her voice breaking when she finally spoke. "I need time," she said quietly. "I can't just pretend this didn't happen." "I understand," Alexander replied. "Take all the time you need. Just know I'm not hiding anymore. I'll be here trying." Over the next several weeks, Camille poured herself into her pregnancy and emotional recovery. Alexander, to his credit, made efforts. He scaled back business travel, attended therapy, and sat beside Camille during joint counseling sessions. He admitted the weight of being a Whitman, the impossible expectations, and how Bianca had offered an escape he hadn't known he craved. Camille opened up about her own pain, how isolated she had felt. The cracks didn't vanish, but slowly, carefully, the edges softened. Then, one crisp morning, Camille made a decision. She asked Alexander to meet her in the drawing room. With calm determination, she told him she was willing to try counseling to explore if their marriage could be mended, but only if he agreed to sign the postnuptial agreement Mia had prepared. The document ensured that if Alexander were ever unfaithful again, Camille would be entitled to a significant share of the Whitman estate, no questions asked. Alexander hesitated only briefly before signing. "I understand," he said, his eyes brimming with tears. "I'll do anything to make this right." Over the next 2 months, they existed in a delicate peace. The estate, for a fleeting moment, felt like a home again, not a battleground. As the final month of her pregnancy approached, Camille's health stabilized. On a crisp winter morning, Alexander drove her to the hospital. After hours of anxious waiting and silent prayers, the first cry of their baby pierced the air sun. Camille held him close, tears streaking her cheeks. Alexander stood beside her, weeping openly as he whispered apologies and promises of devotion. In that moment, all that remained was a hospital bed where a mother, a father, and a child formed the fragile beginnings of something new. Bringing their son, whom they named Leo, back to the Whitman estate felt surreal. The mansion, once heavy with scandal, now echoed with midnight feedings and soft lullabies. Alexander appeared transformed, committed to fatherhood with unexpected depth. He rose for late-night diaper changes, insisted Camille rest, and learned to soothe their son with songs passed down from his own childhood. The storm of courtroom revelations faded into the background, replaced by the exhausting, beautiful rhythm of new life. Months passed. Their son grew into a curious toddler, chasing shadows and laughter through the massive halls. Their marriage was no longer a glittering fairy tale. It bore scars. But there was also something resilient, something stronger than illusion. They were bound not just by love, but by survival and a shared promise to give their child a better story. One warm summer evening, exactly 2 years after the courtroom explosion, Alexander and Camille stood together on the Whitman estate's balcony. Below them, Leo ran barefoot across the manicured lawn, chasing fireflies with unfiltered joy. His laughter rose into the twilight air, a pure, unburdened sound. Alexander slipped an arm around Camille's waist. She tensed for a moment, a muscle memory of past hurts, then allowed herself to lean into him. He didn't speak, but instead he placed a small, velvet box in her hand. It wasn't a lavish diamond, but a simple gold locket. She opened it to find a tiny, perfect picture of Leo inside. "It's not to replace anything," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "It's to start something new. For us. For our family." A genuine smile, the first one that had reached her eyes in a long, long time, bloomed on Camille's face. She closed her hand around the locket, its warmth a small anchor in the vastness of their shared history. They had endured a storm that could have and maybe should have ripped them apart. And yet they remained. A family, bruised, yes, but no longer broken. The Whitman legacy was no longer about preserving an illusion of perfection, but about the quiet, resilient work of building a future worthy of their son's laughter. In the end, they found something far more valuable than a flawless reputation, a second chance, forged in truth and fought for together. This story is a powerful reminder that the deepest wounds can heal and that true strength is often found not in avoiding the storm, but in rebuilding after it has passed. It shows that betrayal doesn't always have to be the end of the story, and sometimes the most difficult journeys lead to the most beautiful destinations. If this story of resilience, forgiveness, and the challenging path to a new beginning resonated with you, please show your support. Give this video a like to let us know it moved you. Share it with someone who might need to hear a story of hope, and most importantly, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We have so many more real, raw, and unforgettable stories to share with you. Thank you for being a part of our community.